getting them to that point where they've completed all the required sort of coursework and that sort of thing.
Good afternoon to everyone here and good morning to anyone watching who is in Western Australia. Welcome to our webinar on creating advanced reports part 2. I'm Charissa and with me as usual is my team member Rowan.
Hey everyone.
Now earlier on in part 1 of our advanced reports webinar, we covered class enrollments, unit enrollments and online assessment related reports. Today, we'll continue looking at building other types of complex and commonly requested reports with a focus on attendance reports and other e-learning reports. We expect that a good portion of you are already using aXcelerate, but for anyone who isn't, we hope this gives you some insight into how flexible our report building tools can be. As usual, we'll be monitoring your questions in the stream chat and answering any that we can, so feel free to pop your questions down. For any queries that we can't get to, or for those who sent through questions prior to the webinar, we'll be collecting your questions and putting together the answers in a follow-up email that will be sent through later on. So before we start, let's have a quick overview and a recap on our aXcelerate report builder structure. All right, so when any of you start using a report builder, you will start seeing our filters first, and you will see some filters being recommended to you by default. So let's go through the definition of a filter. So a filter allows you to design a report and narrow it down more specifically. So some examples are, instead of showing every enrollment in a time frame, you would set a filter or filters to show you enrollments that are in progress or under a certain qualification. So think of a filter as a funnel. You may want to basically create or set a filter that only shows you in progress students or by a qualification, and our filters are also very flexible. You can delete or add any kind of filters you need. So do play around and have a look at what sort of filters you would like to set per report.
Yeah, it really sets up the search for the report.
Yep. All right, so other than filters, let's have a look at the other section of the report builder. So just above the filters, you will see some buttons, one of them being the display field. Display fields are pretty much what you want to see in the results. So there's a bit of a difference here. A filter does not mean that information will display in the report automatically. Display fields pretty much allow you to choose the parts of the report you see. So a good practice or best practice that we recommend is to include the filter in your display field as well, just to confirm the results you're seeing. And the display fields are basically, at the end of the day, what you want to see in the report. I'll be demonstrating some of these later in our examples, so you'll see exactly what we're referring to.
Yeah, you should see the flow of setting up filters to set certain searches, and the display fields making sure that when you get the results, it'll have all the information we're actually after.
That's exactly right. All right, right now I'll hand over to Rowan, who will take us through creating our very first report today.
Excellent, thanks Charissa. So we're going to start off with a look at a report. We actually looked back in our workflow webinars. If you recall during that, if you've watched that, you may remember we built a report that looked at expiry dates for previous unit competencies. So when someone's achieved a unit, see if they're going to expire on it soon and then send a refresher reminder. So often for students doing things like first aid. Now, there's an alternative report that can look at the expiries for documents you have uploaded into contact portfolios. Rather than recorded units, they're actually uploaded files. And this is particularly useful for tracking, say, the currency of the documents for your trainers, since when you do those uploads, they're going to end up in the portfolio. So if you use this kind of report, we can track if that stuff is expiring. Now, in order for this to work, it will be important to put expiry dates against your uploads. So if you attempt to run this report today and you find you aren't getting much data back when you're doing it, either you don't have uploads or the ones that are in there are probably lacking actual expiry dates for the system to compare against. So with that known, let's go ahead and jump into aXcelerate. We'll take a look at how the report is put together. So I'm going to head up to the report builder up in here. And I'm going to look for that contact portfolio report. We just start a search up in there. It should find that relatively quickly, like so. And just a quick recap here. Remember that most reports come in a live or a warehouse version. Live reports will run pretty much immediately and pull the most current data into the system, into your report, whereas a warehouse report will look at cached or information that is current as of yesterday. So the advantage of a warehouse report, although its data is slightly older, is that one, it runs faster, and two, it's got more advanced filters and display fields. So some of the reports will look at generally only work in a warehouse capacity. This one will work in either way, but for the interest of speed, I'll go ahead and use a warehouse version. So let's say we're trying to look at some portfolio uploads for documents that our trainers have, and we're looking for the ones that are going to expire somewhat recently, say this year, for example. The first thing to do is to go through the filters that Charissa was describing earlier. This first one here, the document category, this is probably a little too broad for us. These are just general categories of documents. We want to look at specific items, so these probably aren't going to be too useful. And you'll find that if you've got a case where a filter isn't really narrowing down on what you're looking for, you can just remove it. So we'll chop that one off. This document type, however, this is probably more helpful. This is going to look at specific types of individual documents in here. So instead of looking for expiries of like a high school certificate, we'll look at expiries of documents that actually matter. So let's drop this down and we'll put in our selection. We've got a number of types in our system here. The ones I'm interested in today are one, the driver's license. We want to make sure that our trainers can drive to their necessary locations. And also we'll put in the blue card or working with children check, like so. So in Queensland, that's for working with children check card, maybe different in other states, but that's another thing we want to make sure is remaining up to date. The system has put in the filter of expiry date for me. It's currently looking for things that are going to expire within this current month. That's relatively narrow. I'm going to expand this out to instead look at the current year. So now if any of those documents, a driver's license or blue card, is going to expire this year, we should see them in the results. So that's all we need to set up there. That's going to filter down what we're looking for. However, as previously mentioned, we should also check our display fields to make sure that the results are going to have all the data we need to see in the end. So if I open this up, we can see that we've got pretty much all the display fields we already need by default. We'll be able to see the type of document, the person it's for, and the expiry date as well. So I'll hit done. Won't make any great changes there. And let's go ahead and run the report now. There we go. We can see we've got 4 different items for 4 different people in this case. This person's blue card has already expired. Might need to follow that one up. This one's expired only very recently. Whereas Bruce Willis down here, they've got a driver's license, but it will be expiring later in the year. So perhaps we should remind them to make sure they're getting a new one before September hits. So that's how we can look for expiring documents. But another common question we often get with this report in particular is if it can look for a missing portfolio item. Often this is done when people are putting in portfolio uploads for students. They want to know if a student is missing or lacking a document. And you'll find that's not actually achievable with this report, as it can only target information that is there. It can't actually see a lack of information. So we won't be able to target that with a contact portfolio report. However, I do wish to deviate a bit just to show you another feature which can get you a similar outcome even though it's done through a different interface. So first and foremost, if you have put your portfolio types, these different types here, into a checklist, which can be done through this interface in the system, you can then load that checklist in a different area of aXcelerate, and that will actually show you if indeed someone is missing an item. Where this shows up is in the matrix of a class being the area you enroll accredited students into. They should be in some sort of class grouping. If I jump through in here, you can see a couple we've made from previous sessions, and I'm just going to go to this example here, which has got 6 people enrolled. This will load up the list of the students and the outcomes of their units by default, so just a quick little progress. But we can alter this to instead look at those portfolio items. If we drop down this view up here, we can elect to look at a portfolio checklist, whereupon we'll be asked to then choose the checklist to compare against. You may have several checklists in your account. We just have the one here looking at the student documents. If I click that, it'll reload the table and bring us up this alternative matrix. And we can see here which students have documents. Amelia Arnold here has a blue card. It's currently red because, as we can see, it has in fact expired. Furthermore, this little link icon here, that is indicative of a file has been uploaded to support that. So although she has evidence, all that's in there, it is in fact in an expired state. We can also very quickly check to see if that person is missing anything. You can see they do not have anything about a driver's license nor a high school certificate. So the gaps become really obvious in this view. Counterpoint, Cassandra Jenkins has a similar blue card situation. She does have a non-expired upload against high school certificate, but there's no file attached to that. Literally, someone's gone in and just put in details about the document, but no supporting uploads for it. If that was the case, we would see that link icon as well. So this view really does give you a full overview of what's been put in, if things have been uploaded, and most importantly, if things are missing. So with that all examined, we're going to route back to the report builder now that we've gone through the portfolio options there. We're going to move along and start taking a look at some of the reports that will target e-learning instead. Now, in our previous webinar on reporting, part 1, we did look at how to pull out data related to aXcelerate's online assessments feature. That's our native e-learning system within aXcelerate. And if you're currently using online assessments, feel free to check out the recording of our first webinar. We went through the reports related to that. However, if you're instead using an external LMS integration, things such as Moodle, SCORM, or Canvas, those do integrate with aXcelerate, but to get data out regarding those, you do need to use a different set of reports in the system. So what I'm going to do is, again, head back into aXcelerate here, go to the report builder, and if we scroll down here, we'll see that there is a section for e-learning, like so. And if you've seen the last webinar, you'll be familiar that we did go through a lot of these online assessment reports. And these will target, as I mentioned, aXcelerate's online assessments. However, it will not target other forms of e-learning. In our account, we've put in some SCORM activities, which you can see in here. In your account, you may have Moodle or Canvas instead, or in addition to. And to target this information, we need to defer more to the reports that are specifically looking at e-learning. Now, do keep in mind, for a lot of these, it is advisable to run them in a warehouse capacity, both for speed, and in some cases, it may be the only way to get data related to e-learning out of the system. So, using a quick example, a common need with e-learning is to check in and find out which students haven't actually finished their e-learning. It's very easy to issue those out to people, but you'll often want to check to see if people are actually doing those activities. So you can target those specific enrollments and students with this e-learning enrollments report here. So I'll jump into a warehouse version of that and we can see what our options are. So let's say we just want to get a simple list of all the students who haven't finished their e-learning. One of the most simple ways to set it up. For that, we firstly have to consider our filters as we've been doing. So let's say that we don't really care which particular activity it is. We just want to see the non-complete ones. So in that case, we can remove the activity name and code as we are not targeting them. Similarly, the e-learning enrollment creator date, I'm going to remove 2 because I don't really care when they were put into the e-learning. I just want to know if right now they haven't finished it. So that's not really relevant here. The filter we want to add to replace all that is one that has status in the name, like so. So the enrollee status of the e-learning. You can use this top one, but that does actually require to type in the status. A better option is to often use the list here, as this provides a drop down where you can select the different types of status. You can see here that it's already loaded in these 2 default ones, and this is actually what we'll be using. Students with a booked status have been put into the e-learning, but they actually haven't launched it yet, so they're definitely not finished and haven't actually even started. Whereas those who have commenced have launched their e-learning, but they have not yet completed it. Those who have finished the e-learning would likely either have a result of completed, meaning they successfully went through it, or failed, in which case they finished it, but they did not successfully pass it. So these 2 should capture those who are yet to finish. As with any report, it's always a good idea to double check your display fields to make sure you'll see meaningful results. And we can see here, this again has the default display fields we probably want. It'll show us the student details on the left, the name of the actual e-learning activity here, and the status that they're currently in. So we should only be seeing booked and completed because or booked and commenced because that's the only people we're looking for in the filters. I'm going to hit done and run this report to see what we get. As we can see, we have 3 students in our system who have been put into e-learning and are still not finished it as of yet. So we have Nanette has not even launched her e-learning. These two students are yet to finish it. This may be of concern as their end date was actually back in June, so they're definitely well overdue for that. So alternatively to this, you may instead want to see the list of all students in one activity and all the different statuses they have. So say, I want to see everyone who's enrolled in motivational ethics, and I want to know if they've completed, they've started, they've failed, all that wonderful stuff. To do this, we need to head back over here, and we're going to tweak our filters a bit to adjust how we're searching. So in this case, we don't need to filter on status. We want to see all of them. So we won't target any specific statuses. We'll just go ahead and add in a different filter entirely. What I'm going to put in here is firstly the activity name so that I can look at a specific bit of e-learning. So I'm going to say contains the motivational ethics. We'll look for everyone who's enrolled in that specific e-learning activity. We can just run it as like that. One thing you may find useful is to also add an additional filter called the e-learning enrollment created date. That's effectively the date the person was originally enrolled into the e-learning. This can be useful so that you don't pull in students who were enrolled maybe 3 years ago, so your results don't get blown out. You just look for people who are a bit more current rather than entirely historical. So I'm only going to look for people who had some sort of status of the current year. So those people enrolled in 2019 don't get showing up in this report. We'll double check our display fields, and you can see again, every activity should be called motivational ethics. That's what we're searching for, but we should see a variety of statuses because we aren't asking for one specific status, we're asking for all of them. I'm going to hit done and submit from here to see what we get. This can take some time occasionally as e-learning is fairly in-depth in the system. So you may find a report does need a few minutes to process through depending on how large you're searching. As we can see here, we've pulled in all the students studying in motivational ethics. They're in that activity. And on the right, we can see their individual statuses. So Gareth has actually failed this. Lila has commenced it, still yet to complete, whereas Vanessa has successfully completed the e-learning. Now, sometimes you might not want to target specific e-learning activities on their own. This is definitely great to see, but sometimes you may want to actually relate that back to the accredited units they're studying. We don't just want to know if they've completed the e-learning, we want to know if that's looking good in relation to the accredited units that they're studying with that e-learning. We can't actually look at that information in this report as it only looks at the e-learning. It can't pull in any information related to units. We can get what we need, however, we will just need to go to a different report. So I'm going to head back in here. And for those of you who were here for our online enrollments reports, you'll probably find this somewhat familiar. We're going to go to the unit of competency enrollments. This will look at students enrolled into specific individual units, and we can actually pull in extra information related to the e-learning side of this. It is important to make sure we use a warehouse version of this report. You'll find that if you use a live unit of competency enrollments, you won't have any of the relevant e-learning filters or display fields. So this time warehouse is basically mandatory. Upon heading into here, we're going to set up filters and we're going to target a specific scenario. Let's say that you want to get a list of all units that students enrolled into where they're not yet competent in the unit, they haven't got a final competency, but they have finished all their e-learning. This will give us a list of people where we can say, well, they've completed all the learning. Should they have their accredited information resulted as competent? We want a list of basically names to check for that. To start off with, we'll remove out our filters, start from scratch, keep this nice and clean. And we're going to put in filters related to e-learning. Now, to find units that have had all the e-learning completed, we actually need to use a bit of a combination of these, which I'll show here. So if we go ahead and open these up, we've got a few to choose from. We'll need to put in the e-learning completed. We'll also need to put the number of e-learning failed and remaining. And lastly, we'll also put in the total. All right, so these are the four we'll work with. Now, to make sure we're only looking at students who have finished all their e-learning, we're going to change this first one, the number completed, to greater than or equal to 1. This ensures that they definitely have at least one completed e-learning activity. right now, they could potentially have some failed and they'd still show up. To avoid that happening, we're going to make sure that the number of e-learning failed here equals to 0. So that way we're saying they have at least one completion and they have no failures at all. So if they've got 5 activities and at least one of them is completed, they'll come in the results. If any one of those are marked as failed, the student will not show up in the results here. Now you may be thinking, what about the e-learning they haven't yet started or the e-learning that's in progress? To eliminate that possibility, we're going to make sure that this here, e-learning remaining, equals 0 as well. So this means we're now going to look at students who have at least one completion, have no failures, and no in-progress e-learning. So basically, these 3 are making sure we're looking at only people who have finished all the e-learning assigned to them for that unit of competency. The reason I've put this final filter in here is, remember, we are looking at a unit of competency enrollments report. That means we may potentially pull in students who are in a unit but actually don't have any e-learning attached to the unit. So to avoid that possibility, I'm going to put this in here and say that the number of e-learning in total is greater than or equal to 1. So now only people who actually have e-learning will show up in the report, in addition to making sure only those who have fully completed everything are in the results. So that's the combination we'll use to make sure we're only finding people who have all their e-learning finished. Furthermore, as mentioned in the scenario, we want to only look at student units that are not currently competent. If they've finished all their e-learning, but they're already competent in the unit, we don't really care about that. That's already finished. We don't need to adjust anything. But so to avoid picking up those, we're going to put in the outcome code as a filter and make sure that we look for outcomes that exclude those students who are already competent. And I'm also going to exclude those who have a credit transfer. So now if those are true and they've completed all the e-learning, we won't see them because we don't need to action it. We only want basically the in-progress students for these units. There's a lot more we can filter on these outcome codes, as you can see here. That's because these look across multiple different state reporting bodies, and that will be specific to who you're reporting to. Finally, this is optional, but you may want to also add an activity end date. This is the date of the unit of competency itself. Do consider that if a student's been put into e-learning, but the unit isn't due to be finished for months from now, it's pretty unlikely that that unit will be due to be finished. So you can use this to make sure you're only looking at a certain date range. So, all right, I want to check for students who are getting close to being finished, maybe in the current month, and see if they've finished their e-learning yet. That's what you can use that date for. To make sure we get a nice spread of data, I'm going to leave this off. We'll look at everything for now, but do keep that in mind for your results, as you may have a lot more e-learning than we do in our account. With that said, I'm going to double check our display fields before running this. And you will see that this has plenty of information related to the person, the qualification they're in, and those individual units, but there's actually nothing about the e-learning by default on here. So to make sure when we run it, we'll see what we need to see, I'm going to add to the display fields and put in all the e-learning ones, like so. With that set, we'll hit done and submit. And this again may take a moment. And now we can see all these individual units. So we have Heather Lane here in a first aid unit, currently CA, continuing activity or in progress. And we can see on the right here that out of all her e-learning, she has completed all of it. She had 1 total and 1 completed. But she's still in progress, so this is perhaps a unit we need to go in and change to competent. And the same for all these other individuals, including this one which she hasn't yet started, apparently, but is still completing all the e-learning. So perhaps this code too is out of date and needs to be updated. So I hope it gives you an idea of how you can relate e-learning to your training activities. Again, if you've seen online assessments, some of this is probably quite familiar, but remember that e-learning in terms of reporting here refers to things outside of online assessments, things such as Moodle, SCORM, Canvas, external LMSs like that. At this point, I'm going to hand over back to Charissa now, who's going to take us on a few more reports looking at attendance.
All right, thanks very much, Rowan. So looking at attendance reports, basically we're going to look at a couple of attendance reports, and these reports are very useful for any of you tracking students' attendance within aXcelerate, particularly CryoCOS providers who need to pay close attention to this data as part of the eSource Act. Okay, so let's have a look at the sort of reports we want to build. Jumping back to our report builder. As a recap, we need to use a warehouse report when looking at attendance reports simply because the attendance data is cached and cannot be picked up by live reports. So we are dealing with percentages here, and that is the key reason why warehouse reports will only work for attendance reports. Now, we're going to use the all-encompassing class enrollments report, warehouse. Let's click into it and see what we can see. By default, these filters pop up, so don't forget to delete the filters that you don't require. So I'm going to remove qualification because I'm not too concerned about filtering down a particular qualification, and I'm also going to remove the trainer. However, the enrollment status is always a very useful filter to retain in these sort of reports. I specifically want to be looking at in-progress students. I'm not concerned or interested in anyone who's completed, deferred, suspended, or cancelled. Next, I'm going to not worry about the enrollment date as well. That's not something I want to filter down on. Okay, so attendance filters. Let me show you some key tips and tricks. If you click into the filter field and type the percentage symbol, you will see actually a good variety of different percentages that you can add to the filters. But for today's demonstration, I am concerned with the first one, that's the maximum possible session attendance. This particular filter measures the average attendance of the student if they were to attend every single one of their remaining sessions within their class enrollment. So pretty much from now till the end of the course, what will their maximum attendance be if they attended every single session? This is especially useful for crash course providers wanting to send out warning letters. So when you click into this drop-down field, you will be presented with some parameters. So you'll simply select the one that you want. For example, the max attendance could potentially be less than or equal to, say, for example, 95%. And this report can essentially fire off your first warning letter email.
So basically that should start dropping when you when student misses any sessions, because the maximum possible attendance that they will naturally goes down if they start dropping sessions they could attend.
That's right. The next attendance filter we can look at is the attendance percentage to date. So if you're not concerned with looking at the maximum attendance and you're simply wanting to look at the number of sessions the student has attended versus how many has been run so far, this would be the filter that you want to set. So for example, if from the start or the commencement of the student's enrollment till now there has been about, say, 5 sessions and the students only attended 1, the attendance percentage to date would be 20%. The other filter, the final filter we can look at in terms of attendance, would be the percentage progress. So this particular filter looks at the attendance recorded against the student across all the scheduled sessions. So pretty much a very rough average. Now, so it's up to you to set the sort of parameters, the sort of filters that you want to set. But for today's demonstration and for the purpose of what we're trying to demonstrate or show today, I'm going to remove all these filters. However, I will add them in the display fields so that we can see how the data appears. So let me just pop these filters down.
So we'll get everyone who's currently in progress, and out of all of them, we'll just see what their attendance percentages are, basically.
Okay, so as you know, you can move these details around, and in order not to clutter up your report, you feel free to remove anything that you don't need to see so that your report is nice and clean. All right, so I'm going to take out all these filters I don't need and simply go done and run the report. Okay, so we've got a good bit of data here. Now, don't forget, you can always expand the view to show you the full list here. As you can see, we do have different statistics or different pieces of data across each of these percentage columns. If we have a look at, say, for example, Alice Ivy, the maximum possible attendance is 87.5. So if she was to attend everything from now till the end of the course, this is the maximum she can ever achieve. At the moment, the attendance to date, she has only attended 52.9, so just barely half of all the sessions that has been scheduled for her. And overall, the entire percentage across the whole course is 14.1. So not exactly looking good for her at this point.
That's quite small because she isn't due to finish until December, so she's still got a way to go. So that's why the attendance progress, it's looking at the entire duration of the course, so it's usually going to be quite low, but we can tell by the attendance to date, as Charissa said, Alice is only showing up for about half the sessions she could have so far, which isn't great.
Yeah, that's right. So don't forget you can export these reports as an Excel file or save the report for future generation. Okay, and that's pretty much your attendance reports. Okay, so the next report we're going to go through as an extension of what we've just covered earlier is that we can go one step further to look at specific days of attendance rather than combined percentages. So we're going to look at something called a complex date report. Back in our workflow webinars, we looked at setting up an automated reminder to alert students or staff when someone misses a session. This was powered by a complex date report, as mentioned. You can pretty much use this report, for example, to look for students who have missed any sessions that they were meant to attend yesterday. So let's have a look at generating this report. Jumping back to our reports menu, I'm going to collapse this particular section here. This report, complex dates, is actually sitting under the workshop section. So if you open this up, it's the last report on the list where it says complex dates booking. So as usual, we're going to run a warehouse report. All right, and start removing the filters that we don't need. So we'll take out the workshop type. Also not concerned about workshop start date, but we're going to retain this particular filter here because if you mouse over the information bubble, this is what captures your complex dates. So pretty much your complex dates are what are set in a multi-session workshop. So if you've set up a workshop that runs over, say, 2, 3, or 4 weeks, and a student's meant to attend, say, twice a week, all these individual session dates or multi-session dates are created as a complex date. All right, as the parameter for the parameter, I'm not going to set it for this month. Now, typically, if you're wanting to send or capture students who have missed yesterday's session, you would change this to yesterday. But for the purpose of today's demonstration, we are actually going to swap it to last month in order to generate more data. I'm going to keep the key participant status as approved and booked, but I'm going to remove the completed status because I'm not interested in capturing anyone who's cancelled or moved, tentative, that sort of thing. So just approved and booked would be good to go. Finally, I'm going to include one more filter called attend. So if you type in the word attend, you'll see this particular attended filter. I want to set this to no. What you're seeing here is I've set up a complex date booking report that's going to capture every student who has been booked into a session for last month and they have not attended that. Now, as a good practice, we're going to include attended in our filter. All right, and as usual, we can move these sections around. Let's go down and hit the submit button. Okay, as you can see, we've got some data over here that tells me all the students who have missed last month's sessions. So pretty much a popular action now that you've got this report set up ready to go, a popular action is to set up workflow so that every day the system runs this report, captures students who have not attended, and then automatically sends either a reminder or warning email to them. So if you're interested in doing that, please refer to the recording of our workflow webinar part 2 for steps on how to do this. Okay, right. So please feel free to pop in your questions if you have any. Right, and that wraps up today's webinar on creating e-learning and attendance related reports. Hopefully this gives you an idea on how to use the report builder more effectively and what key terms and special symbols you can enter that unlocks the less well-known filters. If you've popped in any questions in the chat room, and we can see quite a number of questions going, we'll be putting together the responses to your questions and send those out very shortly. we do have another reporting webinar lined up. That's part 3, where we'll be taking a dive into aXcelerate's finance-related reports. So keep an eye out on our webinars page for the date and time of the session. For today, though, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. See you next
See ya.
time.